Keys on the hood, right now. May I ask what probable cause you have for this search? I don't need to explain myself. Keys, hood, now. You absolutely need to explain yourself. That's not optional. That's the Fourth Amendment. You want to play lawyer on the side of this road? Go ahead. I'll have this vehicle torn apart before your attorney gets here.
Officer Troy Brandt, badge number 2291, had been with the Hargrove City Police Department in Georgia for 11 years. In those 11 years, he had accumulated 23 formal complaints, 16 filed by black motorists, all described the same documented pattern. Searches of vehicles without consent or probable cause, asset seizures that were subsequently returned without charge, and a specific habit of initiating contact with black drivers of high-end vehicles on the department's primary highway corridor with no recorded traffic violation in the initial stop log. Every complaint had been reviewed by the department's Internal Affairs Division. Every complaint had been closed. Brandt had been promoted to Field Training Officer in his 7th year, a promotion that had been approved by a chain of command that had access to the same complaint file, and had chosen, repeatedly, not to treat it as relevant to the question of whether Brandt should be given authority over new officers learning how to police. On the morning of Saturday, October 7th, at 9:12 a.m., Brandt was running solo patrol on Highway 19 when he observed a black Range Rover SV autobiography, retail price $185,000, traveling southbound at the posted speed limit with both hands visible on the wheel and no observable traffic violation. He followed for 2 minutes. He activated his lights. He had no radar reading, no traffic violation, no anonymous tip, no reasonable articulable suspicion of any kind. What he had was a black man in a vehicle he had decided required his attention. What Brandt did not know, what no one at the Hargrove City Police Department below the rank of chief had been publicly informed of, because the city's formal introduction ceremony was not scheduled until the following Monday, was that the man behind the wheel was Commissioner Raymond Elias Voss, the newly appointed Commissioner of Police for Hargrove City, who had been confirmed by unanimous City Council vote 6 days earlier, who had relocated from Atlanta specifically to take the position, who was driving his personal vehicle on Highway 19 on his first Saturday in town to familiarize himself with the department's primary patrol corridor, and who had spent 29 years in law enforcement, including 8 years running internal affairs for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, watching exactly this kind of stop happen to exactly this kind of driver, and that his personal vehicle's integrated dash cam had been recording since he started the engine, and that his phone, clipped to the center console, was also recording, and that every word, every action, and every second of what was about to happen on the shoulder of Highway 19 would be on his desk Monday morning, because he was the desk. Before we go any further, drop where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe a man who spent 29 years in law enforcement should be able to drive his own car on a public highway without being illegally searched by an officer who didn't have 1 second of probable cause, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what Troy Brandt did on Highway 19 on October 7th was not a stop. It was 23 complaints walking up to a window. And this time, the window rolled down to reveal the man who was going to decide whether any of those complaints would ever be closed again. Commissioner Raymond Voss had been in Hargrove for 4 days. He had arrived on Tuesday with 2 suitcases and a folded piece of paper that was his lease agreement on a house 12 minutes from headquarters. He had not announced the arrival publicly. He had not issued a press statement. He had not asked for a welcome. He had asked for 3 things from the city manager who had recruited him: a desk, a complete copy of every internal affairs file from the past 8 years, and 2 weeks before his formal introduction so he could spend them learning the department's actual culture before the performance of his arrival created the version of it that people wanted him to see. He was 54 years old. He had grown up in Macon, attended Morehouse College on a partial athletic scholarship, completed a master's in public administration at Georgia State, and joined the Georgia Bureau of Investigation at 25 through a competitive fellowship program that his academic record made him a natural candidate for. He had spent 8 years in the GBI's field division before moving to internal affairs. where he had spent the next 8 years building a reputation as the investigator who did not close complaint files without a reason that would survive scrutiny. He had been promoted to division director, then deputy director, then had been recruited to serve as deputy police chief in Atlanta, where he had spent 7 years before the Hargrove opportunity arrived. The Hargrove City Council had been looking for someone with his specific combination of field experience and internal affairs background for 3 years. The department had a consent agreement with the State Attorney General's office, entered into 2 years prior, following a pattern of practice investigation that had found systemic issues with use of force, stop and frisk practices, and internal complaint review. The council needed someone who could execute the reforms the consent agreement required without treating them as a public relations exercise. They had found Voss. He had read the consent agreement on his second night in Hargrove. He had read the IA files on his third. By Thursday evening, he had a working understanding of the department's complaint landscape that would have taken most incoming commissioners 6 months to develop. He had noted 23 complaints with badge 2291 attached. He had flagged the file. He had not yet taken any action on it because he had been the commissioner for 6 days, and he understood that institutional change required a foundation of direct knowledge before it required action. Saturday morning, he decided to drive the highway, not incognito, not in disguise, just in his personal vehicle, the black Range Rover SV that he had purchased 2 years ago, and that he drove because he had owned Range Rovers for 15 years, and because the SV variant's air suspension made long drives through Georgia's variable terrain more manageable for a lower back injury he had sustained in a field operation in 2019. He was wearing a light gray pullover and dark jeans. He had his coffee in the console. He had his phone mounted and recording, a habit from his IA years, when he had learned that the moments worth preserving never announced themselves in advance. He was 12 minutes into the drive when the lights appeared behind him. He saw them in his mirror and felt a specific quality of recognition that had nothing to do with alarm. He had been present for thousands of stops across 29 years of law enforcement. He knew what an initiated stop looked like from the inside of the vehicle being stopped. He also knew from 23 complaint files he had read 48 hours ago that he was on a stretch of Highway 19 that appeared in 4 of those complaints as the specific location where badge 2291 had initiated stops that had no documented probable cause. He pulled to the shoulder. He put the Range Rover in park. He lowered all 4 windows. He placed both hands on top of the steering wheel. He looked at his dashcam's recording indicator, active, and his phone's recording indicator, active, and he waited. Brandt approached from the driver's side. He was 34 years old, built like someone who had played college football and had not entirely left that physical identity behind, and he walked with the specific authority of someone who had been doing this for 11 years without meaningful consequence. He stopped at the window. He looked at the vehicle. He looked at the interior. He looked at Voss. License and registration, he said, without preamble, without stating the reason for the stop, without any of the procedural introduction that the department's own stop protocol required. Voss looked at him. He looked at badge 2291 on the left chest. He looked at the body cam on the right. He noted the time on the dash cam, 9:12 a.m., he said. Of course. May I ask what the reason for this stop is? You were driving suspiciously. What specific driving behavior did you observe? I don't need to describe it to you. Brandt's hand moved to the doorframe. License and registration. Voss produced his Georgia driver's license, personal, not departmental, bearing his name and his Hargrove address, which he had updated at the DMV on Thursday. He produced the vehicle registration. He handed both through the window. Brandt looked at them. He looked at the address. Hargrove knew. He looked at Voss. He handed them back without walking to his cruiser to run them, which was the procedure the department's own traffic stop protocol required before any further action. Step out of the vehicle, Brandt said. On what basis? Because I'm telling you to. That's not a legal basis, Voss said. His voice held the specific register he had used in 8 years of internal affairs interviews. Level, patient, precise. The voice of someone who was listening more carefully than they appeared to be. The law requires you to have a specific articulable reason for requesting a driver to exit a vehicle during a traffic stop. What is that reason? Brant's jaw tightened. He had heard versions of this before. Drivers who knew the language of rights. In 11 years, the language had never protected them from what came next. Out of the vehicle. Last time, Voss opened the door. He stepped out with the deliberate slowness of someone who was ensuring that every movement was clearly visible and clearly intentional. He stood on the shoulder of Highway 19 and looked at Brant with an expression that contained no fear and no anger, and nothing except the attentive patience of someone collecting information. "I want you to state clearly for your body camera," Voss said, "that you have asked me to exit this vehicle without stating a legal basis for the request. I am complying. But I am complying under protest, and I want that on the record." Brant walked past him toward the Range Rover. He leaned into the open driver's window and looked at the interior. He looked at the back seat. He said, "I'm going to need to search this vehicle." "Do you have my consent?" Voss said. "Do you have something to hide?" "That's not the question. The question is whether you have my consent." "You do not." "Do you have a warrant?" "I don't need a warrant." "Under what exception?" Brant turned to look at him. The particular look of someone who has been operating for 11 years in an environment where the procedural questions had never required answers because the system had never demanded them. "Plain view." "What did you observe in plain view that justified a search?" Brant said nothing. "I'll need that answer," Voss said, "because it's going to be in my report, your report." The contempt in those two words was specific and unambiguous. It was the contempt of someone who had been doing this for 11 years and had never once had a driver on this highway produce a report that mattered. "Who do you think you're making a report to?" "Keys on the hood," Brant said. "Right now." "May I ask what probable cause you have for this search?" "I don't need to explain myself." "Keys, hood, now. You absolutely need to explain yourself. That's not optional. That's the Fourth Amendment." Brant stepped toward him. Not aggressively. The practiced proximity of someone who used physical presence as punctuation. "You want to play lawyer on the side of this road. Go ahead. I'll have this vehicle torn apart before your attorney gets here." A white pickup truck had slowed on the highway. The driver, a man in his 40s in a contractor's work shirt, had pulled to the far shoulder and stopped. He was watching. He had his window down. Two more vehicles had slowed. One of them had a phone visible in the driver's window. Voss looked at the body cam. He looked at his dash cam, whose angle captured the full exterior of the encounter. He looked at his phone on the center console, still recording. He looked at Brant. "I want you to think carefully about what you're doing," he said, "because in about 3 minutes, you're going to realize that you just conducted an illegal search on the person who signs your performance reviews." Brant made a sound that was the audible version of dismissal. "Nice try, Keys." Voss looked at him for 3 seconds, not with anger, with the specific patience of someone who has been in this moment before, from the other side of it, in rooms and files and disciplinary hearings, and who knows with absolute certainty how it ends. He said, "My name is Commissioner Raymond Elias Voss. I was confirmed by the City Council 6 days ago, and I have been watching how you work for the last 4 minutes. Every second of it is on that camera, and it will be on my desk first thing Monday morning." He said it the way he said everything in professional settings, without elevation, without drama, with the specific flatness of fact. Brant looked at him. The highway noise continued. The truck on the far shoulder was still there. The phones in the passing cars had not lowered. Brant said, "You're not." "Reach into the glove compartment," Voss said. "The appointment letter from the city manager is in the right side. The city council confirmation vote summary is behind it." Brant's body cam captured what happened next. He walked to the passenger side of the Range Rover, opened the glove compartment, and removed a folded document. He unfolded it. The Hargrove City seal was at the top. His eyes moved down the page. Appointment of Raymond Elias Voss as Commissioner of Police, Hargrove City, Georgia. Effective immediately upon council confirmation. Confirmed by unanimous vote of the Hargrove City Council, October 1st. He looked at the name. He looked at the man standing on the shoulder. He looked at the body cam on his own chest. His hand holding the document was not steady, not dramatically. The specific involuntary tremor of a person's whose nervous system had received information that their pride had not yet agreed to process. He looked at the city seal. He looked at the signature of the city manager at the bottom. He looked at the date. 6 days ago, he had a complaint file with 23 entries. The man on the shoulder had read it on Thursday. He set the document on the passenger's seat. He stepped back from the vehicle. He looked at the body cam. He looked at the phone on the center console. He looked at the truck on the far shoulder with the contractor watching through the open window. He looked at the passing vehicle with the phone visible. He said nothing for 7 seconds. Voss said, "I'd like my keys returned." The search stopped and your supervisor contacted. In that order. Brandt produced the keys from his belt where he had clipped them without having been given consent. He placed them on the hood of the Range Rover. He reached for his radio. His hands were steadier by the time he keyed the mic, but only barely. Sergeant Diane Okafor arrived on Highway 19 at 9:31 a.m. She had received Brandt's radio call, terse, uninformative, requesting supervisor presence at a traffic stop, and had been 4 miles away. She pulled to the shoulder, stepped out, and walked toward the scene. A Range Rover SV, with all windows down, a contractor's truck still parked on the opposite shoulder, and her field training officer standing beside the vehicle with the body cam running, and the expression of someone who had just made an error that they could not calculate the full size of yet. She looked at Voss. She did not recognize him, because the formal introduction had not happened, because the Monday ceremony had not occurred, because she was Sergeant Art of Department, whose incoming commissioner had specifically chosen to arrive without announcement. Voss produced the appointment letter and held it where she could read it. She read it in 11 seconds. She looked at Brandt. She said one word, "Badge." Brandt unclipped his badge, the Hargrove City PD shield, 11 years of service. He held it for a moment that his body cam captured completely. The specific weight of a thing leaving your hand that you understand you are not getting back in the same form. He placed it in Okafor's palm. The metal was warm. She logged the time, 9:34 a.m. She told him to go to headquarters and wait for eye contact. She watched him walk to his cruiser. She watched him drive away. She turned to Voss. "Commissioner, I apologize." "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. He looked at the highway. He looked at the stretch of road where Brandt had followed him for 2 minutes before activating his lights. He looked at his dash cam, still recording. "I'll need a copy of every traffic stop record from this corridor in the past 24 months. I'll need it Monday." He got back into the Range Rover. He drove the remaining stretch of Highway 19 at exactly the speed limit. He checked his mirrors twice. The Internal Affairs investigation opened Monday morning. The same morning as the commissioner's formal introduction ceremony, which Voss attended, shook hands at, accepted a commendation from the mayor for, and then excused himself from early to return to his office, where the file on badge 2291 was already open on his desk. The investigation was completed in 14 days. The evidence required no interpretation across 4 sources: Brandt's body cam, Voss's dash cam, Voss's phone recording, and the contractor's phone video, which the contractor, a man named Gerald Sims, who had watched the entire encounter from his truck, had submitted to the department voluntarily the following morning after seeing the story on local news. Brandt's complaint history was reviewed in full. 23 complaints. 16 from black motorists, all closed. The IA investigators report, written under a commissioner who had spent 8 years running internal affairs and who reviewed every draft before it was finalized, produced a finding that had never appeared in a Hargrove PDEI report before. The documented pattern of conduct, represented by badge 2291's complaint history, constitutes a systemic failure of this department's complaint review process. Each individual complaint, reviewed in isolation, was closed. Reviewed in aggregate, they describe a consistent, racially discriminatory enforcement pattern that this department was obligated under its own policies and its consent agreement with the state attorney general to address and failed to do so. Brandt was terminated 40 days after the stop. His Georgia Peace Officers Standards and Training Certification was submitted for review. The Post Council reviewed the body cam footage, the complaint history, the IA finding, and the consent agreement context. Permanent decertification was recommended and adopted in 31 days. His pension, 11 years of contributions, was forfeited in full under the consent agreement's misconduct provisions, which had been designed specifically to ensure that officers whose conduct violated the agreement's requirements did not receive retirement benefits funded by a city they had operated against. Criminal charges were filed under Georgia's statute, prohibiting unreasonable search and seizure under color of law, a misdemeanor enhanced to a felony given the documented pattern the IA finding had established. Brandt's attorney argued good faith reliance on plain view doctrine. The prosecution showed the jury the body cam footage in which Brandt stated he did not need to explain himself when asked for probable cause, and then showed them the 4-second pause before he offered plain view as his justification. The jury deliberated 8 hours. Guilty. Sentencing. 2 years with 18 months suspended. Brandt served 6 months before release to supervised probation. The civil lawsuit was filed by Commissioner Voss as a private individual, not through the department, not under any official capacity, but as a citizen who had been subjected to an illegal search without consent, probable cause, or warrant by an officer whose documented history made the encounter racially discriminatory, by pattern if not by stated intent. The complaint named Brandt personally and the city of Hargrove institutionally, with the institutional claim grounded specifically in the consent agreement violation. A department that had entered into a formal agreement with the state to reform its stop-and-search practices had promoted the officer with the highest complaint volume to field training officer, extending his pattern into the training of new officers. The city's legal team reviewed this argument, reviewed the consent agreement, and understood immediately that there was no defense available that would survive the juxtaposition of those two facts. Settlement discussions began within 3 weeks of the filing. The settlement was finalized 4 months later. $3.2 million. The city's liability carrier contributed $2.1 million. Brandt's personal liability was assessed at $1.1 million, attached to his assets after the criminal conviction made non-indemnification mandatory. He had a house. He had a retirement account. After the judgment, he had substantially less of both. His wife filed for separation 6 months after the settlement was announced. His children, 2 teenage boys who attended Hargrove High School, asked to go live with their mother before the trial concluded. Commissioner Raymond Voss directed none of the settlement proceeds into personal expenditure. Every dollar was allocated before the settlement was finalized, because he had made the decisions about where the money should go before he filed the lawsuit. $1.2 million established the Hargrove Police Reform Implementation Fund. Administered by an independent oversight board, which was specified in the consent agreement and which had been underfunded since the agreement's signing. The fund provided resources for the external auditing, community liaison work, and training infrastructure that the consent agreement required, and that the department had been unable to fully implement without external financial support. $1 million went to the Georgia NAC Legal Defense Fund's Traffic Stop Litigation Program, which had been documenting and challenging unconstitutional stop and search practices across 5 Georgia counties, and which had identified Hargrove's Highway 19 corridor in a preliminary report published the previous year. $600,000 established the Voss Accountability Scholarship at Morehouse College, his undergraduate institution, for students pursuing degrees in criminal justice, public administration, or law with a specific focus on law enforcement accountability and reform. 5 scholars enrolled in the first year. $400,000 funded a community policing liaison office within the Hargrove PD structure, a civilian-staffed office reporting directly to the commissioner's office that received, tracked, and published the disposition of every complaint filed against a Hargrove officer on a public dashboard updated monthly. The Hargrove Traffic Stop Integrity Protocol, developed by Commissioner Voss's office in the first 60 days of his tenure and adopted as a department-wide general order, required all officers to state the specific traffic violation observed before initiating any traffic stop, to record the stated reason in real time on their body cam before activating pursuit lights, and to document all consent requests and refusals during any vehicle encounter. The protocol further required monthly supervisor review of all traffic stops in which no citation was issued and no arrest was made, with automatic escalation to the IAA division for any officer whose uncited, unarrested stop rate showed a statistically significant racial disparity. In its first 12 months of implementation, the protocol reduced uncited, unarrested stops on Highway 19 by 67%. It was adopted by 4 neighboring departments within 18 months, and was cited in the State Attorney General's annual consent agreement review as the most effective reform measure implemented by any department under a consent agreement in the previous decade. Commissioner Voss continued in the role. He drove Highway 19 regularly. Same Range Rover. Same route. Same speed. He did not announce the drives. He did not take a department vehicle when he was doing corridor observation. He drove his own car because the quality of a department's streets was visible from the inside of a private vehicle in a way that the inside of a marked patrol car obscured. He arrived at headquarters by 8 a.m. most mornings. He left when the work was done. He reviewed every IA complaint himself before any of them were closed. Troy Brandt served his 6 months and completed his probation from a 2-bedroom apartment in an adjacent county. He had found work in commercial pest control, a company that ran background checks but whose background check criteria did not disqualify a discertified officer with a single felony conviction. His name returned 290,000 search results. The first result was the 4-camera compilation of the Highway 19 stop. The second was the post-decertification summary. The third was a piece in the Georgia Law Review titled The Voss Stop. Illegal Search Doctrine. Pattern evidence and the institutional accountability gap in consent agreement enforcement. The Range Rover SV was still parked in the commissioner's space in the Hargrove PD headquarters lot every weekday morning when the building opened. Same vehicle, same black exterior, same Georgia plates. On Saturday mornings, sometimes it was on Highway 19. The dash cam was always running. If you believe the incoming commissioner of police should be able to drive his own car on his own city's highway, without being illegally searched by an officer who had 23 complaints in his file and a field training assignment that should never have been approved. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that consent agreements without accountability are just paperwork. What specific oversight mechanisms should every department under a consent agreement be required to implement before they promote any officer with more than 5 unresolved complaints? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you believe 23 complaints and a promotion to field training officer is the specific combination that tells you everything you need to know about why some departments never change until the wrong person is standing on the shoulder, subscribe. We are not stopping until the complaint file that nobody reads gets a reader who has the authority to make it the last one.